pursuit of power. In a world torn apart by war and conquest, where the echoes of battle filled the air and the ground was soaked with the blood of countless soldiers, a new force quietly emerged. It was a force not of weapons or armies, but of ideas that spoke to the deepest yearnings of the human heart. This force was Kodo's religion, a beacon of hope in an era of despair, offering solace to the souls adrift in the turbulent seas of conflict and uncertainty. Kodo's teachings arrived at a crucial juncture in history, a time when the very fabric of society was being unraveled by the relentless pursuit of power. With each passing day, the world seemed to sink deeper into chaos, and the people, lost and fearful, clung desperately to anything that might offer them a sense of stability and purpose. It was in this void that Kodo's message took root, spreading like wildfire among those who were searching for something to believe in. Kodo, with his exceptional oratory skills and unwavering conviction, quickly became a figurehead for this new spiritual movement. He spoke with the authority of one who had seen the truth, who understood the struggles and fears of the common people, and who offered a way forward, a way that was guided by moral principles and a vision of a better, more just world. War has brought us to the brink of destruction, Kodo would often preach, his voice filled with both sorrow and determination. But in the midst of this darkness, we can find the light. We can choose to live not by the sword, but by the principles of truth, compassion, and righteousness. It is within our power to create a world where justice prevails, where the weak are protected, and where every soul finds peace. His words resonated deeply with those who heard them, striking a chord that had long lain dormant within the hearts of many. The people, weary of the constant strife and bloodshed, longed for the peace and harmony that Kodo promised. And so, they began to flock to his banner, pledging their allegiance not just to a man, but to the ideals he represented. The simplicity and clarity of Kodo's message were key to its widespread appeal. He spoke in terms that anyone could understand, breaking down complex philosophical concepts into everyday language. He preached about the importance of kindness, the need for empathy, and the value of truth. He called upon his followers to live lives of integrity, to treat others as they themselves wish to be treated, and to stand against injustice in all its forms. Let us live as Sisu intended, Kodo would say, invoking the name of the revered figure at the heart of the new religion. Let us be the light in the darkness, the hope in despair, the justice in a world full of cruelty. By doing so, we can bring about the paradise we all seek, a world where love and peace reign supreme. Kodo's disciples, eager to spread the word, took his teachings to the far corners of the land. They preached in markets, in town squares, and in the fields where farmers toiled from dawn to dusk. They spoke to soldiers, merchants, and peasants alike, drawing them into the fold with promises of salvation and a better life. Slowly but surely, the teachings of Kodo began to infiltrate every aspect of society, offering the people a new way to see the world and themselves. But beneath the surface of this spiritual awakening lay Kodo's true motive, revenge. Behind the gentle, compassionate leader was a man driven by a burning desire to uncover the truth behind the deaths of his biological parents and his adoptive father. Kodo's every move was calculated, his every word carefully chosen to build a following strong enough to help him in his quest for justice. The religion he had founded was not just a spiritual path, it was a tool, a means to an end. Kodo had never forgotten the night his parents were murdered out, nor the cruel fate that had befallen his adoptive father. The pain of those losses had shaped him, hardening his heart and fueling a desire for vengeance that no amount of time could quench. And now, with a growing army of followers at his command, Kodo saw the path to that vengeance laid out before him. He would use the power of faith to bring his enemies to their knees, to expose the lies and treachery that had destroyed his family, and to exact justice on those who had wronged him. For Kodo, every sermon, every conversation, every action was a step towards his ultimate goal. He preached of peace, but his heart was set on war, a war that would be fought not with swords or spears, but with the power of faith, with the unwavering conviction of a man who had nothing left to lose. As the flames of war continued to rage across the continent, leaving destruction and despair in their wake, Kodo's religion served as a beacon of hope and resilience for those who had lost everything. His followers, inspired by his teachings and his unwavering resolve, found the strength to endure, to rebuild, and to fight for a better future. But Kodo's path was a dangerous one, fraught with peril at every turn. The more power he amassed, the more enemies he made, and the closer he came to the truth he sought, the more he risked losing everything he had worked so hard to build. Yet he pressed on, driven by a force stronger than any fear, a force that had been forged in the fires of loss and tempered by the cold steel of revenge. In the end, Kodo's story would be one of triumph and tragedy, of light and darkness, of a man who sought to change the world, and who was, in turn, changed by the world he sought to shape. The religion he had founded would continue to grow, spreading its message of hope and salvation to the farthest reaches of the land. But at its core, it would always carry the mark of the man who had created it, a man whose quest for justice had led him down a path that few would dare to follow. As Kodo stood before his congregation, gazing out at the faces of those who looked to him for guidance and strength, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had given them hope, he had given them purpose, and he had given them a reason to believe in something greater than themselves. But more than that, he had given himself the means to achieve the one thing that had driven him from the beginning: revenge. The path ahead was still long and uncertain, but Kodo was ready. He had the power, he had the followers, and he had the will to see his mission through to the end. And as he looked out at the sea of faces before him, he knew that nothing would stand in his way, not the secrets of the past, not the enemies who sought to destroy him, and not the darkness that threatened to consume him. Kodo would have his revenge, and he would do it in the name of faith, in the name of truth, and in the name of Tsisu. And when it was all over, when the final reckoning had come, the world would remember his name, not just as the founder of a religion, but as a man who had changed the course of history forever. The rising tide. In the wake of the cataclysmic war that had ravaged the continent, the survivors of the conflict struggled to rebuild their lives amid the rubble of their former homes. It was a time of great uncertainty, where the old order had been shattered, and the new one had yet to take shape. Amid this chaos, a new figure began to emerge, a man whose influence was growing at an unprecedented rate: Kodo, the founder of the Tsisu religion. Kodo's teachings, which preached salvation, redemption, and a return to moral principles, resonated deeply with a populace desperate for hope. The faithful flocked to him in droves, drawn by the promise of a better future, one where righteousness would prevail, and the suffering of the past would be left behind. The community of Tsisu followers swelled rapidly, encompassing people from all walks of life, from the highest-ranking military officials to the humblest citizens. As the dust of war settled, and the continent began to heal from its wounds, the influence of Kodo and his religion continued to expand. Regular gatherings for prayer and worship became a common sight in towns and cities, the fervor of the believers growing with each passing day. The new faith had become a potent force, binding its adherents together with a shared sense of purpose and destiny. But not everyone viewed the rise of Tsisu with admiration. Within the halls of power, where the newly appointed Datu of the United Continent, Ruda, held sway, there were whispers of unease. It was in this atmosphere of quiet concern that one of Ruda's most trusted officials, General Horlin, requested an audience with his leader. Horlin, a seasoned military strategist with a keen eye for potential threats, approached Ruda with a sense of urgency. The two men met in Ruda's private chamber, a room adorned with the spoils of his recent conquests. The heavy drapes muffled the sounds from outside, creating an atmosphere of solemnity and introspection. Ruda, seated behind a massive oak desk, gestured for Horlin to speak. Dr. Ruda, Horlin began, his voice steady but with an edge of concern. I come to you with news that I believe warrants your immediate attention. Ruda leaned back in his chair, his expression one of mild curiosity. Go on, General. What is it that troubles you? It's about this religious movement that has been spreading across the continent, Tsisu, they call it. The man leading it, Kodo, has gathered a significant following. His influence is growing by the day, and from what my intelligence reports, it is more than just a spiritual awakening. It's becoming a movement that could challenge our authority. At the mention of Kodo's name, a flicker of recognition passed over Ruda's face. He recalled the stories his father, Eurus, had told him, stories of betrayal and bloodshed, and the price that had been paid to secure their family's place at the top. Kodo was a name tied to that dark past, the son of a man whose life had been snuffed out to pave the way for Ruda's rise to power. Ruda's thoughts churned as memories of his father's involvement in the assassination of Kodo's adoptive father, Natsu, resurfaced. The ghost of his father's deed seemed to loom over him, casting a long shadow. For a brief moment, doubt gnawed at Ruda's confidence. But Ruda, ever the pragmatist, quickly brushed aside the unsettling thoughts. His father had done what was necessary to secure their family's legacy, and Ruda had no intention of letting old ghosts undermine his authority. Kodo and his followers are no threat to us, Ruda replied dismissively, waving a hand as if to brush away Horland's concerns. He may have a few thousand devotees, but they are just people looking for comfort in the wake of war. Let them have their prayers and their sermons. It will keep them occupied and out of our way. Horland frowned, sensing the reluctance in Ruda's response. Datu, with all due respect, I believe you underestimate the potential danger here. Kodo's movement is not just about spiritual guidance. He is building an army of believers, people who see him as more than just a religious leader. They see him as a savior, someone who can lead them to a new order, one that might not include us. Ruda's eyes narrowed, irritation flashing across his face. Are you suggesting that I am in danger of being overthrown by a preacher? That my authority, won through blood and iron, could be challenged by a man who speaks of paradise and hell? I'm suggesting, Horland pressed on, undeterred by Ruda's growing annoyance, that we cannot afford to ignore this. Kodo is not just any preacher. He is the son of Natsu. His followers believe in him with a fervor that borders on fanaticism. If we allow this to grow unchecked, we could be facing a rebellion that no army can easily crush. Ruda slammed his fist onto the desk, the sound echoing through the chamber. Enough. I will not be swayed by fearmongering, General. We have faced far greater threats than a man with a book and a following of peasants. Kodo's influence is limited, and as long as we keep an eye on him, he poses no real threat. Horland took a deep breath, his concern for the future outweighing the risk of angering his leader. Datu, I understand your confidence, but I urge you to reconsider. We must take decisive action now, before it's too late. A movement like this, if left to grow, could spiral out of control. We need to curtail Kodo's influence either through negotiation or by force, before he gains more power. Ruda's face hardened, his eyes narrowing into cold slits. You will not tell me how to rule, General. Kodo is a minor issue, and I will not waste our resources on a wild goose chase. We have more important matters to attend to, like solidifying our control over the territories we've conquered. Horland stood silent for a moment, frustration gnawing at him. He could see the danger that Ruda was blind to, but he also knew that pressing further would only push Ruda away. The Datu's mind was made up, and nothing Horland could say would change it. As you command, Datu, Horland finally replied, his voice resigned. But I implore you to at least keep Kodo and his followers under close surveillance. If there are signs of unrest, we need to be ready to act swiftly. Ruda nodded curtly. Of course. I'm not a fool, General. I'll keep an eye on Kodo, but for now, let the man preach. Let him offer his followers whatever solace he wishes. They will soon find that no religion can protect them from the reality of this world. With that, Ruda dismissed Horland, turning his attention back to the plans laid out on his desk. As the door closed behind the general, Ruda leaned back in his chair, his thoughts briefly returning to Kodo. There was a time, long ago, when Ruda might have worried about the rise of a figure like Kodo, someone who could inspire the masses and turn them against the established order. But Ruda had learned long ago that power was not about winning the hearts of the people. It was about control, about force, and about making sure that no one dared to challenge your authority. Kodo was nothing more than a man with a voice. And in Ruda's world, voices could be silenced. Meanwhile, Horland left the chamber, his mind troubled. In his heart, Horland knew that the seeds of conflict had already been sown, and that the rise of Kodo's religion would not be easily contained. As Kodo's influence continued to spread, the stage was being set for a confrontation that would challenge not just the power of Ruda, but the very fabric of the society he had built. The tides of change were rising, and with them came a storm that could sweep away everything in its path. But Ruda, blind to the warning signs, would not see it until it was too late. The storm on the horizon. 2 years had passed since Ruda, the unifier of the continent, had solidified his control over the vast and diverse lands under his rule. The once fractured territories, plagued by incessant wars and rivalries, now found themselves in an era of relative peace, a peace enforced by Ruda's iron grip. For many, this newfound stability brought a welcome reprieve from the chaos of the past, but beneath the surface of this tranquil facade, a new force was quietly gathering momentum. Kodo, the enigmatic and charismatic leader of the Tsisu religion, had spent these 2 years tirelessly spreading his faith across the continent. His message of hope, redemption, and spiritual renewal resonated deeply with a populace still scarred by the horrors of war and the uncertainties of the future. From the heart of gorillas to the distant reaches of Tajera, Leoniais, Hyaenia, Birais, and Wolfia, Kodo's teachings took root in the hearts and minds of the people, offering them a sense of purpose and belonging in a world that had long seemed devoid of both. The rapid growth of the Tsisu religion did not go unnoticed by Ruda, though its significance eluded him. The reports of Kodo's influence reached him frequently, news of gatherings in distant towns, of sermons that drew thousands, of a movement that seemed to be weaving itself into the very fabric of society. Ruda, ever the pragmatic ruler, saw potential danger in any force that could unify the masses under a banner not his own. However, the true implications of Kodo's rise remained frustratingly vague to him. In his palace, Ruda struggled with how best to address this burgeoning movement. The delicate balance of power that he had painstakingly constructed could not afford to be disrupted by a religious figure who commanded such fervent loyalty. And yet, Ruda was a man of action, one who believed that threats were best neutralized quickly and decisively. So, he made a decision in keeping with his nature, a decision that bypassed the slow wheels of bureaucracy and judicial procedure. Kodo would be arrested. The order was issued with the cold efficiency that had come to define Ruda's reign. There were no formal charges, no trial, and no public announcement. The mere existence of the Tsisu religion, with its potential to inspire dissent and disobedience, was enough in Ruda's eyes to justify the arrest of its leader. The command was given, and the wheels of the state machinery began to turn. But Kodo, ever prescient and perceptive, had anticipated this moment. For years, he had traveled openly, preaching his message without disguise or deception, knowing full well that his rising influence would not go unnoticed by those in power. He had prepared himself and his followers for this eventuality, understanding that his arrest was not a matter of if, but when. The police officers arrived at the church where Kodo was delivering a sermon. They had expected resistance, perhaps even violence, but what they encountered was something entirely different. The congregation, numbering in the hundreds, fell silent as the officers entered, their gazes fixed on Kodo. The leader of the Tsisu religion remained calm, his demeanor unshaken by the arrival of the authorities. Kodo raised a hand, signaling to his followers to remain seated. He then stepped forward, meeting the officers with a serene expression. "I know why you're here," he said, his voice carrying across the hall with quiet authority. "There's no need for force." The officers, momentarily taken aback by Kodo's calm acceptance, hesitated. They had orders to arrest him, but the sheer composure of the man before them made it difficult to see him as a criminal. Yet, their duty was clear. "Let me talk to Joku," Kodo requested, his tone leaving no room for refusal. "You know who I am." The officers exchanged glances, uncertain of how to proceed. They had not been prepared for such a request, but the quiet strength in Kodo's voice compelled them to comply. After a moment of silent deliberation, they nodded, leading Kodo to a small chamber at the back of the church where Joku, his trusted advisor and confidant, was waiting. The room was dimly lit, its atmosphere heavy with unspoken tension. Kodo and Joku faced each other in silence for a moment, each man fully aware of the significance of what was to come. The bond between them was one forged in the crucible of shared vision and purpose, and now it was being tested in the face of imminent danger. "Please do what we need to do while I'm not here," Kodo murmured to Joku, his words laden with meaning that only his advisor could fully understand. Joku nodded, his expression a mixture of determination and sorrow. "I will. Everything is prepared." There was nothing more to be said. Kodo knew that his path was set, and that the time had come for him to face the consequences of his growing influence. As he was led away in handcuffs, escorted out of the church and into the waiting police vehicle, Kodo's thoughts were not of fear or regret. Instead, he felt a sense of resolve. This was merely the beginning of a larger plan, one that had been in motion long before his arrest. Meanwhile, Ruta received the news of Kodo's capture with a sense of satisfaction. He had acted decisively, removing what he perceived to be a potential threat before it could grow beyond his control. To him, Kodo was nothing more than a religious zealot, a man whose influence could be easily curtailed by the power of the state. But Ruta's victory was far from complete. While he had successfully detained the leader of the Tsisu religion, he had yet to grasp the full scope of what Kodo's movement represented. It was not just a collection of followers, it was an idea, a belief system that had already taken root in the hearts of countless individuals across the continent. As Kodo sat in his cell, awaiting the fate that Ruta had decided for him, his mind was not on the present moment, but on the future. He knew that his arrest was not the end, but rather the catalyst for what was to come. The teachings of the Tsisu religion had already spread far and wide, and with Joku at the helm, they would continue to do so. Kodo understood that his true power lay not in his physical freedom, but in the faith of his followers. Back in the capital, Ruta's officials began to sense the undercurrents of discontent that Kodo's arrest had stirred. The news of his detention spread quickly, and with it came whispers of unrest. The people who had found solace in Kodo's teachings now saw him as a martyr, a symbol of resistance against the very regime that sought to control them. One such official, Minister Turan, brought his concerns directly to Ruta. "Datu, we must reconsider our approach," Turan urged during a private audience. Kodo's followers are not merely religious zealots, they are citizens of this continent, and their numbers are growing. If we do not handle this situation with care, we risk inciting widespread rebellion. Ruta, seated at his desk with a look of impatience, waved Turan's concerns aside. "Kodo is in custody, Minister. His movement will die down without his leadership. What threat can his followers pose without him?" Turan leaned forward, his voice low and insistent. "The threat is not just Kodo himself, but the ideas he represents. The people are drawn to his message because it offers them something they cannot find in your rule, hope. If we do not address the underlying issues that have given rise to this movement, arresting Kodo will only strengthen their resolve." Ruta's eyes narrowed, his temper flaring. "You worry too much, Turan. I have dealt with far greater threats than a religious movement. The people will fall in line, as they always do. They know what happens to those who defy my rule." "But Datu," Turan persisted, "we cannot rule through fear alone. We must consider the consequences of turning Kodo into a martyr. His arrest could ignite a fire that we cannot easily extinguish." Ruta slammed his fist on the desk, his patience finally snapping. "Enough. Kodo is no martyr. He is a man like any other, and he will face the consequences of defying my authority. You speak of ideas and hope, but I have seen what hope does. It blinds people to reality. My rule is the only thing keeping this continent from descending into chaos. If Kodo's followers wish to challenge that, they will learn the hard way what it means to defy me." Turan knew there was no changing Ruta's mind. The Datu was resolute in his belief that power was absolute, and that any challenge to his authority could be crushed through force. But Turan also knew that Ruta was underestimating the resilience of the people who had turned to Kodo for guidance. As Turan left the chamber, his thoughts were heavy with foreboding. The continent had known peace for 2 years, but the seeds of discontent had been sown. He could only hope that Ruta's dismissal of the growing religious movement would not lead them all into a conflict that could shatter the fragile stability they had worked so hard to achieve. Outside the walls of power, the followers of Tsisu continued to gather, their faith unshaken by the arrest of their leader. In the streets and in their homes, they spoke of Kodo with reverence, believing that his sacrifice was a testament to the truth of his teachings. And in the shadows, Joku worked tirelessly, ensuring that the flame of their movement would continue to burn, even as the storm clouds gathered on the horizon. As the continent stood on the brink of an uncertain future, the true test of Ruda's rule was yet to come. The storm that had been brewing for years was finally approaching, and when it broke, it would leave no corner of the land untouched. Shadows of greatness. In the stark confines of his prison cell, Kodo sought refuge in the only sanctuary left to him, his mind. The stone walls around him, cold and unforgiving, offered no comfort. The iron chains binding his wrists and ankles served as a constant reminder of his physical captivity. But within the realm of his thoughts, Kodo was unchained, free to wander through the vast landscapes of history and philosophy, through the corridors of time where the greats of the past still lived on in the echoes of their deeds. Today, Kodo found himself grappling with questions that had haunted humanity since the dawn of consciousness. What was it that set the great figures of history apart from the ordinary masses? What allowed them to rise above their circumstances, to leave an indelible mark on the world, while others faded into obscurity, their lives unremarkable and forgotten? He closed his eyes, shutting out the harsh reality of his surroundings, and allowed his mind to drift. He recalled the tales of the ancient philosophers of Greece, men like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, who had dared to question the very nature of existence and knowledge. They had challenged the world around them, seeking truth in a society bound by tradition and superstition. Yet, for all their wisdom, even they had been bound by the limitations of their time, their teachings often misunderstood or twisted by those who came after. He thought of the revolutionary thinkers of the Enlightenment, who had lit the fires of reason and individual rights in a world still shackled by tyranny and oppression. Men like Rousseau, Voltaire, and Locke, whose ideas had inspired revolutions and shaped the course of nations. But they too had faced the inexorable march of time, their legacies debated, their names becoming mere footnotes in the grand narrative of history. The more Kodo contemplated these luminaries, the more he found himself questioning the nature of greatness itself. Was it truly a matter of individual will and genius, or were these figures simply caught up in the tides of history, their actions shaped by forces beyond their control? And if so, what did that mean for his own sense of purpose and destiny? Was he destined to rise above his circumstances, or was he merely another player in a story already written? As he sat in silent reflection, the sound of footsteps echoed down the stone corridor outside his cell. They were deliberate, each step heavy with purpose. Kodo remained still, his eyes closed, as the footsteps drew nearer. He heard the clinking of keys, the creak of the cell door swinging open, and the hurried whispers of the guards as they were dismissed. Then, a voice, cold and dripping with contempt, cut through the silence like a knife. "It's been a while, my friend and my enemy." Kodo recognized the voice immediately, though he did not open his eyes. He had known this day would come, had anticipated it from the moment he felt the shackles clasp around his wrists. But still, he remained silent, refusing to acknowledge the visitor's presence. "I forgave you once," the voice continued, growing harsher with each word. "But this time, forgiveness eludes you. May you wither away in this desolate place, forgotten and forsaken. Alone, homeless, bereft of family and significance. Revel in the confines of your prison. Mercy will find no place for you, my adversary." The words were laced with venom, each one an accusation, a declaration of enmity. Yet still, Kodo did not respond. His heart beat steadily in his chest, his breathing calm and even. He had prepared himself for this moment, had steeled himself against the emotions that threatened to rise to the surface. He knew that to react, to engage in this verbal sparring, would be to give his tormentor power. And so, he remained silent. The visitor paused, waiting for a response that never came. Finally, with a huff of frustration, the figure turned on his heel and marched out of the cell. The heavy door slammed shut, the sound echoing through the empty corridors like a thunderclap. Only then did Kodo open his eyes, a slow, deliberate action as he let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He didn't need to see the man's face to know who it was, Ruda. The same Ruda who had vanished from his life so many years ago, leaving behind only the bitter taste of betrayal. The memory of their last encounter flashed through Kodo's mind, a vivid recollection of the day Kodo had bid farewell to Durika on her wedding day. His departure marked by a tension that Kodo had never fully understood until now. And now, here they were again, their paths crossing once more, but under circumstances neither could have predicted. Ruda's words echoed in Kodo's mind, a stark reminder of the animosity that had always simmered beneath the surface of their relationship. But as Kodo reflected on the encounter, he felt no anger, no bitterness. Instead, he felt a deep, abiding sadness. For all his power, for all his authority, Ruda was still a man driven by fear and insecurity, lashing out at those who threatened his carefully constructed world. Kodo, however, had long since let go of such fears. His faith in the teachings of Tsisu, and the path he had chosen, had given him a sense of peace that no prison walls could take away. He knew that the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, that the journey he had embarked on was far from over. But he also knew that he was not alone, that his followers, his disciples, would carry on his work, even if he could not. In the silence of his cell, Kodo turned his thoughts once more to the greats of the past. They too had faced imprisonment, exile, and death. They too had been betrayed by those they trusted, cast aside by the very societies they sought to enlighten. And yet, their ideas, their teachings, had endured, passed down through the generations, their legacies living on in the hearts and minds of those who came after. As he sat in contemplation, Kodo felt a sense of connection to these figures, a shared understanding of the sacrifices they had made in pursuit of their ideals. He realized that greatness was not measured by the accolades one received, nor by the power one wielded. True greatness lay in the impact one had on the world, in the lives one touched, and the ideas one planted that would continue to grow long after one was gone. And so, as the hours passed and the shadows lengthened, Kodo remained silent, his mind turning over these thoughts, finding comfort in the knowledge that, no matter what happened next, he had already achieved a kind of greatness, one that could not be undone by chains or prison walls. For in the end, it was not Ruda's threats, nor his anger, that would define Kodo's legacy. It was the faith of his followers, the teachings of Tsisu, the seeds of hope and redemption he had planted in the hearts of the people. And that, Kodo knew, was something far more powerful than any empire or dynasty. In the quiet of his cell, Kodo made a silent vow. He would not let Ruda's words shake him. He would hold fast to the path he had chosen, and he would continue to fight for the truth, for justice, and for the people who believed in him. For as long as he had breath in his body, Kodo would not give up. And even if the world forgot his name, even if he was erased from the annals of history, the impact of his teachings would live on, carried forward by those who came after him. And so, as the day turned to night, Kodo found peace in the knowledge that he had done all he could, that he had fought the good fight, and that, no matter what happened next, he would not be alone. For the spirit of Tsisu was with him, guiding him, sustaining him, as he prepared to face whatever trials lay ahead. Flames of defiance. The imprisonment of Kodo, the charismatic leader of the Tsisu faith, sparked an uprising that swept across the continent like a wildfire, igniting the hearts of his followers with a fervor that could not be extinguished. From the bustling cities of Gorillas to the distant regions of Tajara, Leonias, and Hyanea, a wave of protest and civil unrest surged through the land, challenging the authority of Ruda's regime. At the epicenter of this rebellion stood Joku, Kodo's trusted advisor and now the de facto leader of the movement. As news of Kodo's arrest spread, Joku knew that the time had come to rally the faithful and transform their outrage into a unified force of resistance. Gathering the followers in the grand church that had become the heart of their movement, Joku ascended the pulpit, his presence commanding the attention of all who had gathered. The church, once a place of quiet worship and reflection, now buzzed with the charged energy of the congregation, their faces reflecting a mixture of anger, determination, and hope. Joku looked out over the sea of faces, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He knew that his words would either inspire the people to rise up or plunge them into despair. Taking a deep breath, he began to speak, his voice ringing with conviction. "Beloved followers," Joku began, his tone steady and resolute, "we find ourselves in a time of great trial. Our leader, Kodo, the beacon of our faith and the voice of truth in a world shrouded in darkness, has been unjustly detained by the forces of oppression. This act is not only an affront to Kodo, but to all of us who believe in the righteousness of our cause." The congregation stirred, their anger simmering just beneath the surface. Joku could feel their collective energy, their desire for action, and he knew that he had to harness it, to channel it into something powerful and transformative. "We must rise in the name of justice," Joku continued, his voice growing louder, more impassioned. "We must defend our leader, our faith, and our freedom. This is not the time for silence or submission. This is the time for action, for courage, and for unwavering loyalty to the cause that we hold dear." The crowd erupted in applause, their cheers echoing off the stone walls of the church. Joku's words had struck a chord, resonating with the deep sense of injustice that had been festering within them since Kodo's arrest. He allowed the applause to continue for a moment before raising his hand for silence, his expression serious as he prepared to deliver the heart of his message. "Sisu is eternal," Joku declared, his voice carrying the weight of centuries of belief and tradition. "And so is our resolve. We are not merely followers, we are the embodiment of Sisu's will, the living testament to the power of faith. And it is this faith that will guide us through the darkness, that will give us the strength to stand against the forces of tyranny and oppression." The congregation erupted once more, their voices united in a single cry of defiance. But Joku was not finished. He had more to say, more to impress upon the minds and hearts of those who stood before him. "But let us not be blinded by anger," Joku urged, his tone softening but losing none of its intensity. "Let us not be driven by hatred, for that is the path of destruction. Our power lies in our unity, in our ability to inspire, to uplift, and to transform. We do not seek to destroy, we seek to build a world where justice prevails, where truth is honored, and where the light of Sisu shines bright for all to see." Tears welled in the eyes of many as Joku spoke, his words touching something deep within them. They had found in Kodo's teachings a purpose, a reason to believe in something greater than themselves. And now, in this moment of crisis, Joku had reignited that belief, reminding them of the power they held as a united force. "But we must be prepared," Joku warned, his voice taking on a somber note. "The path we walk is not an easy one. The forces arrayed against us are formidable, and they will stop at nothing to silence our voices. But we must not falter. We must stand firm, with the knowledge that our cause is just, that our faith is unshakable, and that we will prevail, no matter the cost." The crowd roared its approval, their resolve hardening into something unbreakable. They had been galvanized, transformed from a group of disheartened followers into a formidable movement ready to take on the might of Ruda's regime. As Joku stepped down from the pulpit, the crowd surged forward, their energy electrifying the air. They were ready to take their message to the streets, to challenge the powers that sought to suppress them, to fight for the release of their leader and the future of their faith. And so, the flames of discontent spilled out of the church and into the streets, spreading like wildfire across the continent. From the bustling marketplaces of Gorillas to the quiet villages of Hyaenia, Kodo's followers marched in unison, their voices raised in defiance against the injustice that had befallen their leader. But Ruda, ensconced in his palace, seethed with anger as reports of the protests reached his ears. His initial dismissal of Kodo's influence as a mere nuisance had proven to be a grave miscalculation. Now, his rule was being challenged in a way he had not anticipated, and he was determined to crush the uprising before it could gain any more momentum. "Arrest them all," Ruda ordered, his voice dripping with contempt. "These so-called followers are nothing more than traitors, enemies of the state. They must be dealt with swiftly and without mercy." His generals hesitated for a moment, uneasy with the severity of Ruda's command. But the fear of disobeying the Datu outweighed their reservations, and they quickly moved to carry out his orders. Across the continent, the crackdown began, with police and military forces descending upon the protesters with brutal efficiency. But even in the face of such overwhelming force, Kodo's followers remained steadfast. They braved the tear gas and batons, the arrests and beatings, their voices never wavering as they demanded the release of their leader and the end of Ruda's tyrannical rule. Within the confines of his prison cell, Kodo remained serene, his faith in his followers and his cause unshaken. He knew that the road ahead would be difficult, that the struggle for justice would be long and arduous. But he also knew that he was not alone. His followers were with him, standing strong in the face of oppression, their spirits unbroken. It was during one of these long, quiet moments that a prison guard hurriedly approached Kodo, his eyes flickering with urgency. "Your Holiness," the guard whispered, his voice barely above a breath, "outside, your followers are protesting loudly, demanding your immediate release despite police repression. Do not worry, you will be freed soon." Kodo's lips curved into a knowing smile as he gazed upon the guard. In that moment, he realized that even within the confines of his captivity, there were allies among the guards who shared his beliefs and sympathized with his cause. "Thank you," Kodo replied softly, his voice filled with a quiet strength. "But remember, it is not my freedom that matters. It is the freedom of all who believe in justice, in truth, and in the light of Tsisu. That is what we fight for." The guard nodded, understanding the weight of Kodo's words. He had seen the brutality of Ruda's regime firsthand, had witnessed the suffering of those who dared to speak out. And now, he too felt the stirrings of defiance, a desire to stand with Kodo and his followers in their fight for a better world. As the protests raged on outside, Kodo remained a beacon of hope and inspiration for his followers, his unwavering resolve serving as a guiding light in their darkest hour. And though the road ahead was fraught with uncertainty and peril, they marched onward, fueled by the unshakable faith that justice would prevail in the end. The flames of defiance had been ignited, and no amount of repression could extinguish them. The struggle for freedom, for justice, and for the soul of the continent had begun, and it would not end until the light of Tsisu shone brightly over all.